Mark Grannis here with Lecture 1.1, A Way of Knowing the Truth. This lecture accompanies Section 1.1 of our logic text, The Reasonable Person. Today, we'll be looking at the history of logic, specifically Aristotle's contribution to the field of logic, and then some more modern logics that have been developed since about 1900 or so, or the late 19th century. And we'll move beyond those into truth, knowledge, and reason, specifically an instrumental view of logic as something that we use to expand our knowledge of the truth. We'll talk a little bit about knowledge versus opinion and whether those are really two different things. And finally, we'll examine other ways of knowing. The history of logic begins with Aristotle. He's often called the father of logic. Aristotle was born in 384 BC and died in 322 BC. Is it important to know that Aristotle was born in 384 BC? Well, not exactly. Educated people ought to be able to put Aristotle in the right century. 4th century BC will do. Educated people probably know that Aristotle is a student of Plato, and Plato is a student of Socrates. He's very close to the beginning of classical philosophy. And Aristotle was really the first person to think systematically about how we think. He's obviously not the first person to use logic. Logic is in our nature. It's hardwired into us. But Aristotle gets the name father of logic because he's the first one to try and figure out how it works. He wrote 6 different works on this subject that are usually published together under the name organon, which means the instrument, right? And that is how we should imagine logic. Logic is a tool. It's a tool for getting us to expand our knowledge. There is a different kind of logic. There are, in fact, math-oriented logics since the 19th century. You may have heard of symbolic logic. Symbolic logic is what I learned in college. I'm not going to go into it in very much detail, except to say that symbolic logic, as the name might suggest, is mostly about the manipulation of symbols to see what happens to tables of whether the statements symbolized are true or false. It has less connection to the actual world outside our minds than Aristotle's logic does. To give just one very, very brief example, in symbolic logic, the following is a true statement. If polar bears were green, then I would be Pope. Now, of course, that doesn't actually mean anything in the real world. That doesn't help anyone live their lives. It doesn't tell us anything about polar bears, and it doesn't tell us anything about popes, and it certainly doesn't tell you anything about me. So I will say that despite getting an A in my symbolic logic course all those years ago, I never one single time used it in 30 years of legal practice, whereas Aristotelian logic, traditional logic, is immediately useful to lawyers and lots of other people who are just going around trying to get through their daily lives. It is a much, much more practical type of logic. It's the kind of logic basically everyone in the Western world learned for 2,300 years until we ruined it around 1900. So this course is an attempt to get back to what everyone used to be able to take for granted. The touchstone for us is always going to be this instrumental purpose of knowing about reality. We use the logic in order to know the truth about everything. So in a nutshell, logic gives us knowledge of truth about reality. That is the chain that we are always following when we try to use logic and use our reason. So one response to that is to say truth, huh? Well, what is truth? And of course, that's Pontius Pilate's question to Jesus in the Gospels. And it is a question that has echoed down through the ages. Classical philosophy has an answer to it. It's called the correspondence theory of truth. And the correspondence theory of truth is quite old. It goes all the way back to, you guessed it, Aristotle. Here's how Aristotle phrases it. To say of what is that it is not, or of what is not that it is false. While to say of what is that it is, or of what is not that it is not, is true. Or we might summarize that as truth is whatever corresponds to reality. Now, it looks like a lot of words, what Aristotle says, it really makes perfect sense once you learn how to read it the right way. To say of what is that it is not, or of what is not that it is false. While to say of what is that it is, or of what is not that it is not, is true. And if you think about why there are so many words, well, one reason, as we'll learn in a few chapters here, is because truth isn't really a kind of anything else. We can say a dog is a kind of mammal, and a mammal is a kind of vertebrate, and a vertebrate is a kind of animal, and so forth. But you can't say truth is a kind of anything. Truth is, well, it's hard to define what truth is. So Aristotle's answer of not confusing what is with what is not has stood the test of time and is accepted by most people today. But what does it mean to know anything? Well, to know the truth, according to most philosophers, is to have a justified, true belief about the truth. Knowledge is justified, true belief. Each one of those elements, those three elements in that definition, is essential. In other words, it's not knowledge if it's not true. And you don't know it if you don't believe it. And it doesn't count as knowledge if you don't have reasons to justify your true belief. So obviously, the first of those is easy. If it's not true, no one thinks that's knowledge. But if you get the right answer, if you say the right answer, but you don't really believe it's true, like you're saying something to be polite, but you don't really think it's going to be true, or you say it to be hopeful. You say that your team is going to win. You don't really believe your team is going to win. If you don't believe it, you can't say afterwards that you knew your team would win, even if you said that just in smack talk with other fans. And it doesn't count as knowledge if you don't have any reasons. If you flipped a coin to decide, then that doesn't count as knowledge. Now you might wonder, is knowledge distinct from opinion? What if I say, I think my team will win? Or, here's an example. Consider these two statements. All trees have leaves versus, in my opinion, all trees have leaves. Would we say that since the words in my opinion are used in the second statement, that this can't be knowledge, it's only opinion? Well, the first thing to wonder about this is there really a difference? In the statement, all trees have leaves, if I'm saying it, don't we take for granted that it is my opinion? I mean, it doesn't have to be, but normally I think we would say, if I say all trees have leaves, we would say, yeah, all trees have leaves according to me, in my opinion. So we might wonder whether there's really any difference between these two statements. But there could be circumstances in which there is. And if I'm trying to say, well, I'm not sure all trees have leaves, but I think so, I suppose we could get to the point where my belief is so slight, so tentative, that you might say, well, that doesn't count as knowledge. But maybe not. Certainly the word opinion does not prevent this from being knowledge. Let's look at a different example. Chocolate is tastier than vanilla versus, in my opinion, chocolate is tastier than vanilla. Well, this is a little bit different than the example about trees and leaves. Because when someone says, in my opinion, chocolate is tastier than vanilla, that person is probably trying to acknowledge the fact that different people have different preferences between chocolate and vanilla. The person who says chocolate is tastier than vanilla is almost certainly meaning to say, in my opinion, chocolate is tastier than vanilla, but possibly not. Could either one of these count as knowledge? Yes, but these are they could be different claims. For example, objective statements only tell us something about objects external to the speaker. All trees have leaves is a statement about trees and leaves, and nothing about that suggests any relevance for who is saying it or what their personal opinion might be. Whereas subjective statements tell us something about the subject who makes the judgment. When I say, in my opinion, chocolate is tastier than vanilla, I'm probably not making an objective statement about chocolate and vanilla at all. I'm probably making a subjective statement about my preference between the two. So in all of these cases, you'll note that what I'm saying is kind of, well, it depends. It depends on what exactly someone means with this language. What idea does the person speaking mean to communicate? We have to interpret the language to get to that idea before we can really start the logical analysis. So either version in these examples can count as knowledge. The difference really is in what the knowledge is about. Now, logic is great. I'm certainly committed to that proposition. But there are other ways of knowing. Logic is just one. It's a way of knowing. It's not the only way of knowing the truth. Other ways of knowing include the way we know a friend or what a friend would like to do. You can know what someone would think about something when they're not there, when they can't tell you about it, if you know that person well. That's a type of knowledge. It's not the kind of knowledge that we get through logic. Or the way we know beauty. We perceive beauty and we know when we are in the presence of beauty, but we're not reasoning that out. Or the way we know love. How do we know that we love someone? How do we know that we are loved? The way we know that is in relationship, and it's not necessarily something that we can reason out. All of these are, of course, extremely important to a rich and full and flourishing human life. So in other words, logic isn't everything, and you can take that to the bank when it comes from a logic teacher. It is indispensable, but it's not the only thing that you need to get through life in a happy way. That's it for this time. We'll see you for lecture 1.3. Bye.